Bish, did you know the true history of gladiators? Today we're going to take a really deep dive into the subject. This was actually a request by some of my first followers here on YouTube when I made a short trying to explain this as short as possible. I'm going to have all the links to all the sources here in the comments. So sit tight, relax, and enjoy. When we hear the word gladiator, we often imagine cinematic battles, fearless heroes, and brutal death for entertainment. But the true history of Roman gladiators is both more complex and more revealing about Roman society than Hollywood lets on. In this two-part journey, we'll dig into origins, life in the arenas, and how gladiatorial combat and games evolved over centuries. So let us begin at the beginning. Origins, from veneral rites to spectacle. The tradition of gladiatorial combat in Rome is closely tied to munera, that is, obligations or duties. In early Rome, munera were blood offerings conducted to honor the dead and receive goodwill or blessings from spirits. One early recorded instance dates to 264 BC, when the sons of Junius Brutus staged 3 pairs of gladiators to honor their father. Over time, what started as a private funeral obligation became public spectacle. Scholars debate on the exact cultural sources. Some propose influences from Etruscan rituals, others point to Campania or Samnite precedents. By the late Republic, gladiatorial games have been transformed from religious observance to political theater, a way for elites to curry favor with crowds. By the time of Julius Caesar, the spectacles had already grown massive. For instance, Caesar used 320 pairs of gladiators in a funeral display for his deceased father, though his father had died much earlier. Under Augustus, the state began to take direct control of gladiatorial games. Augustus limited how many gladiatorial bouts could be held by private individuals and assigned oversight to magistrates. Thus, the spectacle we think of as Roman gladiatorial games really formed through a process of appropriation, control, and politics. Number 2. Rule 5. Men, slaves, criminals, volunteers. Gladiators came from different backgrounds. Captives, condemned criminals, slaves, and even occasionally free men who chose the career. Prisoners of war were an early and prominent source. Enemies captured in battle, especially from Italy or further afield, could be sold into gladiatorial service. Criminals and condemned persons, meaning those doomed to death, might be forced to fight damnati ad ludus or ad bestias, and free volunteers also existed. Some free men, especially those fallen in hard times, social outcasts, or just plain out thrill seekers, contracted themselves to a lanista, a gladiatorial manager, to fight for pay or glory. Once they entered the profession, gladiators were marked by infamia, a loss of legal and social standing. They were outside certain protections of citizenship and treated as property of the lanista. The life expectancy for many was short. Scholars estimate that in the early empire, perhaps 1 in 10 gladiators died in a given year, though that figure is debated. Yet it's important to note, not every fight was fatal. Sometimes fighters were spared, and a gladiator who performed well might survive many years. Number 3. Training, schools, and life behind the scenes. A gladiator's life was mostly one of training, discipline, and preparation. They were housed and trained in Ludi Gladiatori, gladiator schools, and the largest and most famous in Rome was the Ludus Magnus, built under Domitian, which is around year 81 to 96 AD, and later rebuilt by Trajan. The Ludus Magnus was physically connected to the Colosseum by an underground passage, facilitating the movement of fighters to the arena. Each lanista, manager, oversaw a family of gladiators. Within this school, former gladiators served as doctores, instructors for specific fighting styles. Training often started with wooden weapons for safety and drills against stakes, palus, before combat with real weapons. Gladiators also practiced in the specialized equipment so as to simulate the exact physical conditions of real combat. The different types or classes of gladiators evolved in part to ensure contrast in the arena. Heavy versus light, speedy versus armored. Now, some common types are retiarius, a netman, lightly armed, carrying a trident and net, minimum armor. You have a secutor, which is heavier, more armored opponent, often matched against the retiarius. We have the mormillo, typically with a large shield and crested helmet, sometimes paired with a trix. Trix or Thracian was a smaller shield, parma, and curved sword, sica. They have the matres, which is wielded two swords, one in each hand. There are even more exotic types, for fighting from chariots, on horseback, lasso fighters, and the rarely tested andabata, which are fighters blindfolded. Armor and weapons evolved over time. A study of gladiatorial arms and armor notes that gladiatorial gear changed from 300 BC to about 450 AD, adapting the aesthetics, protection, and spectacle. Inside the training schools, conditions could be harsh: strict discipline, corporal punishment, and close medical care, since a broken arm or leg could end one's usefulness. Some evidence suggests gladiators had diets rich in plant-based foods. Bone analysis indicates elevated strontium levels, consistent with a vegetarian or low-meat diet. The Roman writer Pliny mentions some gladiators as hordeati, which are barley eaters.
The show, how games are held, the rules and audience on game day.
On game day, the spectacle followed a structured format. First came the pompa, a procession of gladiators, officials, and musicians entering the arena. The gladiators were presented, and a referee or editor, sometimes the emperor, would oversee the contest. Before the main fights, there might be preliminary bouts, bloodless duels with wooden weapons, or mock combat. The pairings were often deliberate. A heavily armored gladiator might face a more lightly equipped one, creating tension and asymmetry. When a gladiator was wounded or fell, the crowd and the editor signaled whether he should live or die. If mercy was granted, missio, the defeated man withdrew. If not, the fatal blow was delivered. Victors were rewarded, typically with symbolic crowns, palm branches, prize money from patrons, and donations from the crowd. Meanwhile, the corpses of the fallen were removed via the spoliarium. Interestingly, not all matches were fight to the death. Some were sine missione, without mercy, but many were allowed for the loser to live if he had fought well or the sponsor chose mercy. Occasionally, the games included staged naval battles in flooded arenas or basins, and at times there would be even wild animal hunts or executions of criminals would be integrated into the entire spectacle. The Colosseum, inaugurated in AD 80 under Titus, became the ultimate stage for gladiatorial games. Its substructures allowed trapdoors, animal cages, and stage effects. By the 2nd century AD, emperors maintained exclusive control over game sponsorship. Private individuals needed official sanction to host gladiatorial shows. So, we have traced how gladiatorial games emerged, how fighters lived and trained, and how the shows were conducted. In the next segment, we'll look at the evolution of the games, their social and political meaning, the decline, and legacy. Drop a stadium emoji if you made it this far, and stay tuned for part 2 coming in about 2 days. That's for now. See you later. This is your Vish, Giovanni Albiance. Follow me for more facts, history, food, and word trivia.